Well, it's been a massive show, the Friday sports show here on Flow FM, but we're not done just yet. It's time to bring in our resident North American and Australian sporting guru who made his debut on the airwaves on Flow FM just this week in the Sports Fix, but he was so impressive that we thought we'd get him back again for a second time. It's Eddie Dads from scplaybook.com.au. How are we, Dadsy?
Very well, thank you, Ellis. Thank you for having me back.
Great to get you back, Dadsy. Now, you have actually taken on board the segment that I used to contribute to in shows gone by in recent times. It's the weird world of sports, and I believe to kick things off here, you couldn't have picked anything more weirder.
Yeah, so they've introduced the PGA Tour, obviously golf over in America. They've introduced this player impact program for the 2021 season, and basically they say it's a program designed to reward the players who have the biggest positive impact on the PGA Tour, and it's a $40 million fund of money for the top 10 finishers of this internal list they create, which is basically who has the biggest social media impact on the PGA Tour. So I saw that this week and I thought, that's wild. Imagine trying to rank the players in the AFL based on their social media presence and then paying them $8 million in the case of the player that finishes first based on that presence.
Is it as unique as we think, though? Because when I think of golf players, I don't immediately sort of think about what they're doing on social media. So maybe this is actually a bit of a genius move.
It could well be, Ellis, and I'm very excited to see how it plays out over the next few years. I think the funniest part that I found was, do you want to guess who was the number one player that got themselves $8 million as a result of their social media usage over the past season?
Could his last name end in Woods?
It certainly does. And do you want to guess how many actual PGA Tour events Mr. Woods played in 2021?
I'm going to go with a fat donut.
A donut. So Tiger Woods played 0 golf last year and made $8 million from the PGA Tour, the tour that he plays on, despite playing no events. So the other thing that I found really interesting is they've created this algorithm that calculates the player impact, the metric they use, and it's based on Google searches, how often a player is featured on the television broadcast, a measure of a player's reach on social media, how often a player is mentioned across global medias, and a Q score, which is a metric based on their familiarity and appeal to people.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Dadsy, and you are a marketer as well. So why don't you actually talk to us about how important it's become to be marketable as an athlete? Because, of course, 10, 15 years ago, this was just a non-existent element of being a professional athlete, but it counts for so much now, it would appear.
Definitely. They're basically their own entities at this point, which is, I find really interesting in that, these players, they're self-made people, most of them, particularly in the single-player sports like golf and the ones with with not so much team-oriented stuff like the NBA, that they really are their own brands and their own players. So I don't necessarily think this is a horrible idea for the PGA Tour, and it does sound really weird to talk about, but I think in the long run it'll end up being really good for them. The only downside I think is that it does make the rich get richer. So obviously Tiger was the one who got himself $8 million. Phil Mickelson was second with $6 million. Rory McIlroy with $3.5 million. Jordan Spieth, Bryson DeChambeau, Justin Thomas. It's all the big names. So I think they do need to find a way to reward the sort of up-and-comers, because otherwise they risk creating a bit of a disparity. But overall, the concept is good.
There you go, folks. And switching our attention to the Carabao Cup final that took place in recent days, Liverpool winning against Chelsea in a penalty shootout. But what stood out here was the Chelsea goalkeeper, Kepa, who had yet another mare, Dadsy. He's certainly tallied up all his nightmare performances since he's been at Chelsea. So talk to us about what went on here.
So Kepa was substituted very, very late in stoppage time because Chelsea believed that he was not their best penalty taker. So he came on as their penalty operator because he's apparently quite good with the penalties. But in the end, after all 10 players, outfielders on both teams converted their penalties, Kepa had to step up and try and slot one home to keep his side in it, and he skied it over the bar. But the angle I wanted to take with you here, Ellis, was, do you think penalty shootouts are the best way to finish a game in those circumstances?
Well, I think the argument is there's just no other way. If you keep going in extra time, who knows how long it can go for. I think one thing they could possibly explore are the penalty shootouts, the infamous penalty shootouts of the MLS back in the late 90s, which was it's just comedy if you go back and watch it, but it certainly adds a different dynamic. But also you could re-explore golden goal, because that can certainly be a exciting way to wrap up games, especially when you've got teams, on a level playing field constantly cancelling each other out. But I'm not sure what you make of that, Dadsy.
Yeah, well, I was doing some looking into it over the week, and did you know that the team that takes the first kick in the penalty shootout wins 60% of the time? And that's largely because the scoring rate for penalties for professional players is above 73% in penalty shootouts all time. So the pressure builds on that team who's going second, and it ultimately just means they're at a disadvantage, which gives the coin toss too much power, I guess. And I wanted to throw it. You mentioned golden goal and the infamous MLS shootout, but I've got another alternative for you. Do you want to hear it?
Absolutely.
I've got attacker, defender, goalkeeper. Now, this is a brainchild from a guy called Timothy Farrell, who invented this in 2008. And basically, it features the same amount of contests, so it's 10 penalties per se. But the attacker kicks off from the centre mark of the ground, and he has 30 seconds to score a goal against one defender and the goalkeeper. And basically the aim being to make it less likely that he's going to score, which thus makes it less pressure on the second team, which therefore should mean that the overall win rate is more closer to 50%. What do you think of that?
I absolutely love it, and I dare say IFAB will be in touch with you soon. Eddie Dads, he's so well across it. Beautifully done. Eddie Dads from the scplaybook.com.au. Enjoy your weekend, Dadsy. We'll be back with you next week.
Thanks, Ellis. Thanks for having me.
And that's us done for yet another week here on the Friday Sports Show. Thank you so much for your company. We'll be back with you on Monday for the Sports Fix. Thank you for being with us here across the Flow FM airwaves. Enjoy your weekend.